Usually when we look at a world map, there's this underlying expectation of permanence, like geology.
Right. It gives us a sense of stability. We like to know exactly where things stand, quite literally.
Yeah, exactly. You point to a country, you trace a major international trade route, and the lines just, they sit there anchored to the paper, mountains here, borders there. It feels clean, predictable.
But then you look at the stack of sources you sent us today for this deep dive.
Oh, man, yeah. Suddenly that map just starts melting. I mean, we are looking at a global landscape that is shifting under our feet in real time.
It really is.
So our mission today is to map out this massive resorting of the global world order, both politically and physically. We've got some incredibly dense, politically charged material to sift through today.
Yeah, quite a stack.
We're going from the shifting Russia-China border dynamics to the warming Mediterranean. Now, a quick note before we get into the weeds. We aren't here to pick sides or push any political agenda. We are simply acting as your guides to unpack the raw data and the factual information presented in the materials you provided.
Right. And the overarching theme connecting all of these documents is, well, it's immense systemic pressure. The established arteries of how the world does business are fundamentally altering.
Which means by the end of this deep dive, you're going to see exactly how a Western microchip routed through China, a brand new railway in Central Asia, and a scorched vineyard in France are all deeply connected symptoms of this changing global map.
It's all connected.
It really is. So to understand this, we have to start at the geopolitical epicenter. Let's look at the relationship between China and Russia as of their May 2026 meetings.
Yeah, let's dive into that China Daily Report.
Right. So according to that reporting, President Xi and President Putin just agreed to extend their treaty of good neighborliness and friendly cooperation, which is a pact originally signed 25 years ago.
And diplomatically, they are presenting an impenetrable, united front. The language used in those meetings is highly, highly coordinated.
Oh, absolutely.
They highlight bilateral trade exceeding $200 billion for 3 consecutive years, noting it was up nearly 20% in just the first 4 months of 2026 alone.
Wow.
Yeah. And they are framing the entire partnership as a bulwark against what they term hegemonism and unilateral bullying.
But wait, isn't Russia still holding a lot of the cards when it comes to global energy supply? I mean, if China needs massive amounts of cheap oil to fuel its own manufacturing base, doesn't that give Putin significant leverage to dictate the terms of this partnership?
You'd think so, right?
Yeah, like on paper, this sounds like two superpowers forming an equal alliance.
Well, it would give Russia immense leverage if they had, multiple buyers competing for that energy.
Ah, right.
But when you cross-reference the diplomatic narrative with the hard data from the Kiel Institute, the actual economic reality is entirely different.
The numbers tell a different story.
Completely. The structural asymmetry is staggering. So before the war in Ukraine, the European Union accounted for about 38% of Russia's total exports. Today, that number has plummeted to just 7%.
Wow. From 38 to 7.
Exactly. And China, meanwhile, has swooped in and now accounts for roughly 35% of Russia's total foreign trade.
Okay, let's unpack this. It sounds like Russia traded a vast, multi-partner business ecosystem for a single, very strict landlord. So Russia isn't acting as an independent energy broker anymore. They're rapidly becoming a captive market.
Precisely. And the mechanics of how they are paid is where the trap really snaps shut.
What do you mean?
Well, because of severe financial sanctions, Russia cannot easily trade or hold reserves in US dollars or euros. So when they sell that discounted oil and gas to China, they are accumulating non-convertible Chinese yuan.
Okay, walk me through the implications of that. If you are a sovereign nation holding billions in a foreign currency, why does it matter if it's yuan instead of dollars? Money's money, right?
Not quite. If you hold a globally convertible currency like the US dollar, you can take that money and buy goods, services, or infrastructure from almost anywhere in the world. The dollar is universally accepted.
Right.
But if you hold yuan and you face sweeping international financial sanctions, your primary, almost exclusive option is to take that yuan and buy goods directly back from China.
Oh, wow. So they're stuck.
Exactly. It structurally limits Russia's ability to diversify its supply chains or finance infrastructure with non-Chinese partners. They are locked into a closed-loop system.
That landlord analogy is looking spot on. And based on the Kiel data, that landlord is now supplying the very tools keeping the Russian system afloat.
Yeah.
I was stunned reading the figures on dual-use goods. These are items that can be used for civilian manufacturing or military applications, right?
Yeah, things like heavy machinery, specific electronics, and China now provides over 80% of Russia's dual-use imports.
80%? That's huge.
It gets crazier. Furthermore, when you look at the total increase in Russia's supply of banned critical military components since the sanctions began, China accounts for 76% of that influx.
The logistics of this are fascinating, especially when you look at microprocessors. The Kiel report points out that 97% of the microprocessors being imported into Russia are still Western brands. They're still using Intel and AMD.
Yeah.
But the mechanism of how they get there has completely changed.
Yes, 76% of those Western-branded chips are now arriving via China.
That's just wild.
It is a massive, complex network of shell companies and rerouted supply chains designed specifically to bypass Western export controls, effectively anchoring Russia's entire technological lifeline to Chinese logistics.
And with basic consumer goods, it's not even a logistical rerouting, right? It's total substitution. The data on washing machines really jumped out at me.
Oh, the washing machine stat is mind-blowing.
Right. Western brands have practically vanished from the Russian market. Today, 81.3% of all imported washing machines in Russia are physically manufactured in China. I mean, they are entirely dependent on their neighbor for everything from advanced military components to keeping their clothes clean.
Which highlights the fundamental lack of leverage. Russia is selling its primary asset energy at a steep discount because it simply has nowhere else to send it at that scale. Structurally, the power in the relationship flows entirely in one direction.
Okay, but this brings us to a massive paradox in the source material. If Russia is this isolated, cut off from Western technology and functioning as a captive market for China, how is its economy seemingly booming internally?
Right, the surface level numbers.
Yeah. Unemployment is sitting at a record low of 2.1%. Plus, the data shows that historically poor regions in Russia are suddenly seeing massive bumps in wealth. On a surface level, that sounds like a thriving domestic economy.
It looks like a boom, yes. But the Kiel Institute's analysis reveals it is actually a drastic mutation. The Russian economy has survived by pivoting almost entirely to a war economy.
Okay.
The state is pouring unprecedented amounts of capital into the defense sector to keep production lines moving.
But state capital isn't infinite.
No, it isn't. The hidden costs are cannibalizing their future stability. Russia had a national wealth fund, essentially a massive sovereign piggy bank meant to stabilize the country during crises.
And how is that fund looking now?
Well, by April 2026, the liquid assets of that fund had shrunk to just 1.8% of GDP. They have effectively drained their fiscal buffers.
Oh, wow. And they are borrowing heavily to make up the difference, right? I saw corporate debt has surged by 34 trillion rubles since the war began. To put the sheer scale of the government spending in perspective, in the first quarter of 2026, their federal budget deficit exceeded the entire full-year target in just 3 months.
In just 3 months, which explains the regional wealth convergence you mentioned earlier.
The poorer regions getting richer.
Exactly. Capital is being aggressively reallocated. Regions that were historically impoverished but happen to have old industrial manufacturing bases are suddenly flush with high-paying military procurement contracts.
Okay, that makes sense.
On top of that, regions with traditionally high unemployment are seeing massive wealth inflows purely because of the lucrative sign-up bonuses the military is offering to recruit soldiers.
But here is my issue with calling this a crisis.
Yeah.
If everyday people in these poor regions suddenly have high-paying jobs and cash in their pockets, doesn't that stimulate the wider economy?
Yeah.
Why is this model unsustainable?
Because of the harsh physical limits of the labor market.
Yep.
The Russian central bank governor explicitly warned that an economy with zero spare labor cannot grow faster than its labor productivity.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics of that.
Sure. Imagine a massive factory running at absolute maximum capacity. Every single machine is turned on and every single worker is on the floor. If the government demands more products and hands the factory a massive check, the factory can't just hire more people. Unemployment is at 2.1%. There is literally no one left to hire.
So the factory has to make the existing workers faster or buy more advanced machines.
But Russia is largely cut off from advanced Western manufacturing technology, so they cannot easily upgrade the machinery. So what happens? The factory uses that government money to try and poach workers from other factories by offering higher wages. And the other factories do the exact same thing.
Wages skyrocket, but the actual number of goods being produced doesn't change. You just have more money chasing the exact same amount of products.
That is the textbook definition of runaway inflation. The economy becomes an engine redlining in first gear. It sounds incredibly loud and powerful, but it's not actually moving any faster, and the extreme heat is destroying the internal components.
Man, that is a great analogy.
To combat this inflation, the central bank has to keep interest rates punishingly high. They're forecasted at 14 to 14.5% through 2026.
Oh.
Yeah, and that chokes off any normal civilian business trying to get a loan to grow.
So Russia is a redlining economic island and politically radioactive for Western trade, which creates a massive logistical nightmare for the rest of the world. How does global trade continue to flow from east to west when the single largest landmass on Earth is suddenly off limits?
Well, the global supply chain has to physically redraw the map. The geography of trade abhors a vacuum.
Right, because before 2022, 86% of the overland trade between Europe and China went through what's called the Northern Corridor, which runs directly through Russia.
Exactly.
Obviously, that road is now heavily sanctioned, and the alternative was the Southern Corridor running through Iran. But that is also completely unviable due to heady sanctions and regional conflict. So the world is being forced to carve out a totally new path.
And that new path is the Middle Corridor, frequently referred to as the Trans-Caspian route. The Atlantic Council brief details the sheer scale of this pivot.
What does that route look like geographically?
It is a multimodal trade route connecting China to Europe by snaking through Central Asia, traversing the Caspian Sea, cutting through the Caucasus, and finally entering Europe via Turkey.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This is basically a massive geopolitical bypass surgery. The world is rerouting the major arteries of global trade to surgically avoid the biggest landmass on Earth. But the logistics of a multimodal route sound like a nightmare.
Oh, they are.
It's like trying to run a relay race where the runners have to stop and change their shoes at every single baton pass. You have to load goods onto a train in China, run it through Kazakhstan, stop, unload the train, load the cargo onto a ship to cross the Caspian Sea, dock, unload the ship, and put the cargo back onto a train in Azerbaijan. The friction there must be immense.
The friction is massive, absolutely. But the geopolitical necessity is overriding the logistical inefficiency. The growth figures reflect absolute desperation for a viable route.
What kind of growth are we talking about?
Freight volumes on the Middle Corridor jumped 89% in 2023 alone.
89%.
Yeah, and then another 70% in 2024. The World Bank is projecting that by 2030, freight volumes on this route could triple to 11 million tons.
That's incredible. And it isn't just about moving boxes from point A to point B, is it? It's about what is physically in the ground along that route. The Middle Corridor grants the West crucial access to Central Asia's rare earth elements.
That's a vital piece of the puzzle.
We are talking about the critical minerals required to build everything from electric vehicle batteries to advanced fighter jets.
Exactly. And Turkey recognizes the gravity of this shift. They're investing heavily in infrastructure to position themselves as the ultimate energy and transit hub for this new global artery.
Smart move on their part.
Very. And the European Union is also mobilizing massive capital. Under their global gateway strategy, the EU is heavily prioritizing the Middle Corridor, targeting Central Asia's €340 billion economy to ensure they don't lose the region to Chinese or Russian influence.
But reading the Atlantic Council piece, the glaring omission in all this frantic development is the United States. Why is the U.S. sitting on the sidelines of a project with such obvious generational strategic benefits?
It comes down to a mixture of shifted geopolitical focus and honestly stubborn bureaucratic legacy.
Really? How so?
Well, the U.S. is currently heavily focused on the Indo-Pacific and managing crises in the Middle East, which naturally pushes Central Asia down the priority list. But more mechanically, the U.S. is still enforcing the Jackson-Vanik Amendment.
I had to look this up when I was reading through the sources. It's a Cold War-era trade law, right, from the 1970s, originally designed to restrict trade relations with countries that limited human rights, specifically aimed at the Soviet Union to protect Jewish immigration.
Right. It is a profound piece of legislative inertia. I mean, decades after the Cold War ended, this amendment still restricts formal, normalized trade relations with several Central Asian countries.
That's wild that it's still on the books affecting trade today.
It really is. The Atlantic Council argues that by failing to repeal or bypass this artifact, the U.S. is leaving a massive vacuum in the reacher. If Western capital and influence don't shape the middle corridor, China and Russia will gladly step in to dictate the terms of Central Asia's development.
So Europe is stepping up, desperately trying to fund this massive middle corridor infrastructure. They are pouring billions into Central Asia to secure their external supply chains.
Yes.
But there is a massive leak in their domestic bucket. The capital, Europe, so desperately needs to execute this geopolitical strategy, is literally being swallowed by domestic disasters.
Yeah, and this is where the physical environment begins to forcibly rewrite the political map. The report from the Greek outlet liberal.gr outlines a cascading economic crisis. Europe is currently warming twice as fast as the global average, and the financial toll is accelerating at a terrifying pace.
The historical context here is grim. Since 1980, the European Union has lost roughly 822 billion euros to extreme weather events. But the mechanism of acceleration is what stands out to me. 162 billion of those euros were lost just in the last 3 years.
Exactly. We are moving from long-term projections to immediate, localized economic destruction.
The June 2026 heat wave is a perfect example of this. That single weather event cost European grain producers 2 billion euros, physically destroying nearly 9 million tons of crops.
It's devastating.
And looking ahead, the report estimates that by 2030, the compounding effects of extreme heat could reduce the gross domestic product of major Eurozone countries by 5 to 7%.
It is fundamentally altering the economic engine of Southern Europe. Take the tourism industry, for example, which props up much of the Mediterranean economy.
Right.
The report details the rise of a massive consumer shift called the coolcation trend.
Toolcation trend, because the traditional summer hotspots are physically becoming too hostile to visit in July and August.
Exactly. The extreme, dangerous heat is driving tourists away from the Mediterranean and pushing them northward. Vacations are being booked in Scandinavia and the Baltics instead.
Wow. So people are trading beaches in Greece for fjords in Norway just to avoid the heat.
Yeah, the actual economic center of gravity for European tourism is shifting north, leaving Southern European economies incredibly vulnerable.
And beyond the heat, there is the mechanics of the water supply. The liberal.gr report dives deep into water salinization, which is arguably a much more insidious threat than the heat waves.
Yeah.
Explain the physics of how rising sea levels actually destroy a coastal farm, because it's not just waves crashing over a wall, right?
No, it happens underground. As sea levels rise, the sheer hydrostatic pressure of the ocean pushes salt water inland, forcing it into the underground freshwater aquifers that coastal communities rely on.
Okay.
So when a farmer drills a well to irrigate their crops, they start pulling up salty water.
And applying salt water to traditional crops destroys the soil and kills the yield.
Completely ruins it. So the agricultural sector is forced to adapt by building desalination plants to strip the salt from the groundwater before they can even use it. But desalination is an incredibly energy-intensive process.
Which means it's expensive.
Very. It makes agricultural water up to 10 times more expensive to produce. This isn't just an environmental issue. It is a direct threat to the financial viability of the entire European food security apparatus.
The long-term projections are staggering. The report notes that without massive, immediate intervention, coastal damage could cost between 776 and 814 billion euros annually by 2100.
Annually, it's almost unfathomable.
This synthesizes the core tension facing Europe right now. We just talked about Europe needing to invest billions to secure trade routes and defend its borders in Central Asia. But the European Environment Agency estimates that domestic climate adaptation is going to require between 53 and 137 billion euros annually. How could they possibly afford to fund a new geopolitical strategy when they're quite literally putting out fires at home that cost tens of billions a year?
It is a generational capital crunch. Europe is being ruthlessly squeezed from two sides. On one side, there is the geopolitical necessity of decoupling from a hostile Russia and managing Chinese expansion through massive infrastructure investments like the Middle Corridor.
Right.
And on the other side, there is the existential necessity of domestic climate adaptation. Both require staggering amounts of capital, and both are non-negotiable for long-term survival.
It's a world under intense multi-directional pressure. The geopolitical map is being aggressively redrawn by the highly asymmetric alliance between Russia and China, forcing global trade to carve out the Middle Corridor.
Yes.
And simultaneously, the physical map, the coastlines, the arable land, the habitable zones, is being permanently redrawn by devastating climate impacts.
The resources required to navigate both of these shifting maps simultaneously are straining the foundation of the Western economic system.
Which leaves me with one final thought to mull over, looking at how all your sources intersect. If Russia eventually becomes entirely economically absorbed by China, permanently trapped in that closed-loop UN ecosystem, and Europe exhausts its financial resources fighting these compounding domestic climate disasters, does the Middle Corridor eventually transform from Europe's strategic alternative into China's ultimate, unchallengeable economic lifeline to a weakened West?
That is a profound synthesis of the data. If Europe ultimately lacks the domestic capital to assert real influence over the Middle Corridor's development, that vital infrastructure could easily be dominated by the very power they are trying to counterbalance.
The map isn't just shifting. The lines are being permanently rewritten by whoever has the capital left to draw them. To you, our listener, thank you for submitting such a fascinating, complex stack of sources.
There's been a great discussion.
It's a stark reminder that absolutely nothing happens in a vacuum. A microchip rerouted through a shell company, a train unloaded on the shores of the Caspian Sea, a scorched vineyard in Greece. They're all coordinates on the exact same changing map. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you on the next Deep